Chase at the 40. Look at that move. Look at Chase go. Oh, my goodness. What a gear.
He comes down to this in his car end zone. Intercepted.
McPherson. And Cincinnati is heading to the Super Bowl.
Toss here. Mixon's going to throw. Open man. Caught. Higgins. Touchdown.
Touchdown. Joe Burrow has his first rushing touchdown of the season.
Hooday, Bengal fans. He is Maan. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse, the heartbeat of our Cincinnati Bengals. Maan, episode 11. Can you believe that? We are already on episode 11 of the Bengals Pulse is here. Maan, how was your birthday week? Good week?
Oh, man, I had a great time. Yeah, I can't believe episode 11. Getting better every week. Had a great time. Got to spend time with my family. My kids were in town. Drank a lot of beer. Had a good time. And I'm ready for the show. Yep.
Good deal. And I am feeling much better than I was the last time that you guys saw me. So hopefully have a full recovery there. Mom, we got a lot to get into today. Before we do, though, I want to kind of talk about our plan here for these next couple of weeks. Obviously, with training camp starting up at the end of July, I think July 27th, right?
I believe that is a date, yes. I think the rookies
July
maybe a couple days earlier.
July, in that area, end of July, right. The Bengals released their dates for training camp, which is very exciting. You and I have talked about doing an all-decade team and kind of working our way to that first preseason game. So for our listeners, what we're going to do here from here on out, before we get to that first preseason game, is every week here, we are going to come up with our all-decade team. This week, we are starting with 2010 to 2019. We're going to go through the way we've done it is we have 11 on offense, 11 on defense, plus a flex player for offense and a flex player for defense. We're going to go through, and Maan and I are going to talk about our all-decade team. I'm very excited about this because I know already with this first decade that Maan and I will be arguing about quite a bit of these position groups. But, Mom, before we get into that, kind of a big week for the Bengals, right? I mean, we have Joe Burrow and company. We talked about on one of our previous pods that Joe Burrow was taking a trip to Vegas with Jesse Bates. Now we found out that Cheeto was there too. The guys were invited to a UFC event. We saw the video. We saw the picture. How awesome is it, Mon, that we have our captains, right? Some of our better players and our captains in our locker room out there representing our Bengals in the public eye. To me, it's absolutely awesome. What do you think?
Yeah, it was really great to see. You know, we've talked about it a lot on previous podcasts about team chemistry, and you're seeing that. Those guys are having a lot of fun. And, to be affiliated with that, it was just great to see a lot of good, positive publicity for the Bengals. And, I just love seeing those guys having fun. And it just adds to that, I think, that special trait they had last year with team chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before, and you can see it. And I think, too, I don't want to go into this right now, but Jesse Bates, a big part of that. Hopefully we get something done. But I think more than anything, what this shows is that what we've expected all along is Jesse Bates is playing this year for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh, absolutely.
He's out. We're not going to get any type of a sit out or anything like that. This group is close. And even if it's Jesse's last year, he's going to try to make another run at it with this football team. Some other quick news, very exciting news for all of our Florida listeners like you and I. Living down here in Florida, there's only one Skyline Chili. It's over on the west coast of Florida. But, Mom, we found out this week you and I are getting one a lot closer to us in the Orlando area. So that is very exciting. I know you and I will definitely be making some trips over to Skyline in Orlando.
Yeah, I know. I got all the links and the messages today in our little group that we chat with, and everybody's so excited over Skyline. I love it. It's, I can't eat it every day. But, definitely make a road trip over there, and I'm glad it's closer than the Tampa area.
Yeah, I'm excited. We go over to that Tampa Bay game. We're definitely going to have to hit that up.
Absolutely.
Mon, the last thing I want to talk about real quick is this narrative right now that's going on with our football team. I mean, for me, it is so aggravating I try not to listen to all these pundits and all these clowns like Keyshawn Johnson, these other guys, that obviously never watched a Bengal game last year, have any idea what they're talking about. They're just really trying to get clickbait. But all of these pundits just bad mouthing the Bengals, to me, is absolutely insane what this football team did. Let's, for everyone that thinks that it was a fluke, let's talk about what this football team did at the end of their run. They beat the Raiders in the playoffs, a Raiders team that had won, I think, 4 straight, was one of the hottest teams in football. They went on the road. They beat the number 1 seed with Derrick Henry and all those other guys returning for Tennessee. Then they go on the road and they beat the defending AFC champions, who they beat 5 weeks prior. To me, it's absolutely insane. And again, I'm not expecting everyone to be on the Bengals bandwagon like you and I and our Bengal nation is, but I mean, give us some respect. Good Lord, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. The San Diego Chargers, with a quarterback who hasn't even played in a playoff game, is getting more love than us. I just don't get it, Mon. Can you explain this to me?
No, you know what? I try really hard not to follow the national Bengal narrative, because it's always just, it's lazy reporting. It's just backhanded compliments. And, it started a few weeks ago. Peter King, who, I do read his articles every week, he praised the Bengals. And then guess what? He threw in those backhanded, Bengals got lucky. Ryan Tannehill threw 3 interceptions. Ryan Tannehill led that team to the number 1 seed in the playoffs. And guess what? The Bengals created those turnovers.
Those were great plays that the Bengals made.
Absolutely. And what Rich Eisen said this past, last week, it was refreshing.
Yes, the voice of reasoning, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Rich Eisen has become the voice of reasoning.
Yeah, I know. What he said at the end, the reason people say these things is because it's Cincinnati, and everybody just lives in the past. It just gets me. They add no perspective to the debate. The Bengals are inept. The Bengals have gone to the playoffs 8 times in the last 20 years. I mean, that's hardly inept. And listen, we had some hard times, but we're about to talk. You just mentioned the decade, 2010 to 2019. Hey, man, we went to the playoffs 5 times that decade, 5 years in a row. We're hardly inept. And the future now, going to the Super Bowl last year, like I said a few episodes ago, we're entering a golden age of Bengal football, and let these national guys keep on talking, because it's just going to be great bulletin board material.
I love it. Like our man Zim always talks about, keeping receipts, right?
Yeah.
Zimenez always talk about keeping receipts. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm keeping all these receipts, because this talk is just insane. And you and I had talked a little bit off air about what Paul Dehner had said, and that's our guy. We absolutely love Dehner and Jay, and what Dehner said about the Buffalo Bills, Mon. It hits true to home, right?
Yeah. I mean, what he said was perfect. This was a few of their, I guess maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. He said it on his podcast. He said, the Buffalo Bills they get more credit for losing to the Chiefs.
It's crazy.
Than the Bengals get for beating the Chiefs. And I get what he was saying. I mean, he didn't word it exactly that way, but it's true. The Bengals beat the Chiefs twice. They beat them in Cincinnati. Then they beat them on the road in the AFC Championship game. But the Bills seem to get more credit for losing to them and giving up with 13 seconds left in the game. And I just, it's frustrating.
And both of those Chiefs wins, Mon, were championships for the Bengals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
The division championship was on the line, and the AFC championship was on the line. I mean, that's big time football, and Buffalo didn't get it done. I mean, listen, I have respect for the Buffalo Bills, and I think Josh Allen's a great player, but they are not at our level. And they won't be until they prove it. Football is about proving it on the field. You can talk and talk and talk all you want. The Bengals proved it last year, and they got their whole team returning. The entire team, besides what, 2 guys? And those other positions we upgraded. I'm with you. I try not to listen to all the national media. I have learned that being a Bengal fan for the last 40 years. But it's gotten to the point where it's become a clown show. I mean, it's truly a clown show. It's so lazy to write that narrative anymore about the Bengals. It's just lazy. And I just, coming from a media background, to me, it's a slap in the face to the profession when you have these guys just, they're just talking heads that obviously have no idea what they're talking about or have watched any Bengals football. I cannot wait to hear what they have to say when this season coming up ends and they see where we are again. I cannot wait for all those receipts to be cashed in.
Well, the Bengal fans are so active on social media, and you mentioned it earlier, clickbait. They know that we're going to engage, we're going to click, and it's going to count towards their, views and stats. Yeah. And so sometimes they say these little inflammatory things to get a reaction out of us. But
it obviously works, right?
It is working. If you want to get good Bengal content, follow the local guys. Follow us. Yeah. Follow Ace and Zim. But the local reporters do an amazing job, and they're really connected and dialed in.
Well, like we said, Paul and Jay just doing an awesome job. Dan, Dan, who we had on the show last week, and Jeff and Lap, and those guys that are actually involved with the football team that actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
And the Inquirer guys do a good job too, and they're all solid.
All right, well, let's get into. Let me get off of my soapbox there, man. I just get it just riles me up. I can't calm down. It drives me nuts. All right, let's get into our all-decade team, 2010 to 2019. What a great decade it was too for Bengals football. I mean, you had that transition of the Carson Palmer to Andy Dalton era, and I remember when that whole transition happened. Everyone, again, all the pundits that we talked about the Bengals are going to start a rebuild again. They're going to be on a decline, but as usual, they were wrong, right? So let's talk about this decade of football, and let's come up with our all-decade team. I am so excited to hear what you have to say because I know there's going to be arguments. You and I talk about this all the time. Let's start off with quarterback, Maan. I'll let you go first, I guess, on this one. You go ahead and go first.
That's a real tough one, and I'm joking. It's going to be Andy Dalton.
Of course.
Andy Dalton. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't crazy about it. I was a little heartbroken when they traded Carson because, I was a big Carson fan at that time. I was too. Yeah. And, I wasn't expecting a lot from Andy Dalton. I thought he was going to be more of a stopgap guy. But he came in, and you know what? He led us to 5 straight playoffs.
Yeah.
The same draft class as AJ Green. The Bengals were quietly building a very solid roster, 2008, 2009, 2010 drafts. And you know what? It showed. And Andy really capitalized. He was the ultimate point guard. I know it sounds derogatory, but he really kept everybody in line. And I'm hoping Joe Burrow leads us to 5 straight playoff appearances. I think it could happen. But
I think the difference is if he does, we're going to be playing in more Super Bowls.
Yeah. Well, Kenny Anderson never did that. Boomer never did that. Andy Dalton did, and he's an important part in Bengal history, and he's my quarterback.
Yeah, and he's my quarterback too. Real quick, I know Andy doesn't get a lot of love, but to me, what Andy Dalton did for this franchise was tremendous. I mean, that was a big transition for us that were around during that time frame. Moving on from Carson Palmer, who we all thought was going to be the savior in 2003, and we move on to a rookie quarterback. We were in kind of territory there where we've all seen it before, right? Akili Smith, David Klingler, these names that these rookies try to come in and revitalize this franchise, and they all failed. And Andy Dalton came in and revitalized this franchise. I'm going to leave you with a couple stats real quick. He finished first in completions and first in touchdown passes, and right now is the Bengals all-time leader in both of those categories, and second in yards behind Kenny Anderson. And it's close. It's only like, I think, less than 1,000 yards behind Kenny Anderson. Those are impressive numbers, Mont, especially when you think about the injuries that Andy Dalton had to deal with around him. Not so much with him. He was a mainstay for years and years and years. Obviously, the 2015 injury was detrimental to this football team. You and I both agree that there's no doubt the Bengals win that game that you and I were at with Andy Dalton, and maybe probably advance a little bit further, and who knows after that. But he finishes with 70 wins with a winning record. I know his playoff stats. He was 0-4 in the playoffs because, again, he didn't play in the playoff game that you and I were at in 2015. 1 touchdown to 6 interceptions, which was tough. I mean, we saw some bad plays and some bad throws. He missed AJ a couple times that probably could have been touchdowns in those Houston games. But Andy Dalton is my quarterback as well. And again, I think he definitely left a legacy in Cincinnati. All right, let's move on. Here we go. Running back. I know this is going to be our first disagreement. I cannot wait. Mon, I'm going to let you start first. Go ahead, my man.
Great. Everybody be nice to me. I know this isn't going to be popular.
No, it's not.
It's not going to be popular. Jeremy Hill.
No.
And listen, get the fumble out of your head. I get it. The fumble is the fumble. I was at that game, but Jeremy Hill was a solid player for the Bengals. His rookie year, he only started 8 games and had over 1,100 yards rushing, 5.1 yards per carry. He had 29 career TDs. I just can't get to the fact he only started 8 games his rookie year. He carried the Bengals. You know, that was the year they ended up playing the Colts and losing. That's when they had Colby. They had Colby Hamilton playing wide receiver. They signed him 2 weeks earlier.
Rex Burkhead. Rex Burkhead was playing receiver.
Yeah. And they had injuries the whole year. If it wasn't for Jeremy Hill that year, the Bengals would not have made the playoffs. He carried that team to the playoffs. His next 2 years after, he had solid seasons. I think 700, 800 yards rushing. He never really captured that rookie year. Then, of course, the fumble. A lot of Bengal fans. Listen, I was talking to my son about it. When I told him who I picked, he's like, "Are you crazy?"
Well, that's because the 3 of us were there, Mon.
I know.
All 3 of us were sitting right next to each other when it happened.
It's bigger than one play. It's bigger than that one play. He was a solid player. And you know what? Listen, they had Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis that decade. Yeah. Joe Mixon played in that decade. Obviously, Gio. I'm sticking with Jeremy Hill because I think without him, he had the biggest impact in that one season. He got us to the playoffs in his rookie year, 2014. And that's going to be my running back selection.
All right. Well, mine is going to be Joe Mixon. And the reason being, he played 3 seasons, obviously, 2017, 2018, and then 2019. Because remember, that's all we're going up to, listeners. But Joe Mixon's still my guy. And the one thing I want to talk about more than anything is, Mon, the offensive line that Joe Mixon had to run behind compared to what Jeremy Hill had is astounding. Mon, that the offensive line that Joe Mixon had to run behind those 3 years isn't even in the same league as what Jeremy Hill had. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Jeremy Hill, but let me just give you these numbers. Joe Mixon had, in those 3 seasons, almost 3,000 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns, 108 receptions for almost 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. Okay, so he had 21 touchdowns altogether. And I'm also going to say this, Mom. Jeremy Hill had 1 more season in that decade than Joe Mixon did. Joe Mixon had 3 fumbles in those 3 years. All right, so he averaged 1 a season. Jeremy Hill had 9, Mon. 9, and that's not including the one that ripped the heart out of you, me, and your son Jake, and everybody else that was in that stadium. Listen, I'm a football coach. You got to move on to the next play. That was a big, moment in Bengals history, and it was too big for Jeremy Hill. My guy is Joe Mixon. And to this day, he's still my guy. But for me, what he did behind that offensive line during that rebuild, Joe Mixon is one of the reasons why the fan base stayed connected in the end of that decade. Joe Mixon is my guy. All right, here we go. Receivers, Mon. We got to pick 3 of them. Go ahead and give me your 3 first.
Okay, first one's very easy. AJ Green should be a Hall of Famer, all-decade player, elite as can be. He was a key part of us going 5 straight playoff appearances. I flopped around on this one. I was torn between Sanu Jones and Tyler Boyd. You sort of forget Tyler Boyd was played in that decade, and he did. I got Tyler Boyd, and then I got Marvin Jones as a third. And Sanu was honorable mention. But Green, what can you say? I mean, the guy was just phenomenal. I mean, you can make an argument he's best wide receiver in Bengal history. And, Marvin Jones is still playing, very productive. I wish they would have found a way to sign him and keep him in 2015 when that season ended. Unfortunately, he went to the Lions. He wanted to be the number 1 guy. I think the Bengals did offer him comparable money. And, the Bengals struggled for a few years after that, and then they had to go out and get Tyler Boyd, and he's come in and played well. But those are my 3, and I feel confident with them 3.
And they lost Sanu that year too, right?
They did.
I mean, that was a year where you had those 3 receivers, and you felt really good about that, right? In 2015, and then all of a sudden, both those guys get money thrown at them, like starting number 1 money, which was crazy to me. But here's my 3. Obviously, AJ Green. I mean, what can you say about the guy? He's one of my favorite all-time Bengals. I absolutely love AJ Green. Again, to me, it's so impressive what him and Andy Dalton did. I don't think people realize the importance of those 2 guys in Bengals history. AJ Green, obviously he missed the 2019 season. We all know about the injury that happened in training camp. That was heartbreaking. But in those other 7 seasons, almost 10,000 yards. He did, he had a couple injuries toward the end there, but I'm with you. I think if he doesn't have a couple of those injuries, he is a Hall of Fame guy without a doubt. 6 1,000-yard seasons. Remember, he had 5 in a row. His first 5 seasons, he had 1,000 yards, and then remember season 6, something happened that last game, and he only finished with like 960 yards or something, or it would have been a record or tied for a record, I think. But to me, the 2015 playoff game, that go-ahead touchdown was right in front of you and me. Remember where our seats were?
Yeah.
We saw that. We saw that. That to me gets kind of pushed under the rug because we lost the football game. But if Jeremy Hill doesn't fumble that football, that play by AJ Green will go down in Bengals history as one of the best plays of all time. Again, I think AJ, without a doubt, is not only in my all-decade team for that decade, he's one of my all-time Bengal receivers. And that's saying a lot because, Mon, you and I know there were a lot of good Bengal receivers.
Yes.
My next guy is Tyler Boyd. I'm with you on the Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd, in 2019, Mon, I don't think people remember this, but he had 90 receptions in 2019. He was basically our number 1 receiver. He in that decade, just in that decade now, fans, just in that decade, 240 receptions, almost 3,000 yards. That was in 4 seasons. Obviously, some big plays that he made. The one against Baltimore was just – that goes down as one of my favorite plays too. When Andy hit him on that, what was that, 4th and 12, and just took the soul right out of the Baltimore Ravens. So Tyler Boyd is on my list, and my number 3 guy is going to be a little different. And my number 3 guy is Tyler Eifert. Tyler Eifert played a lot of flex for us, that flex position. So he flexed out wide a lot. To me, he was more of a receiver than a tight end. You talk about what ifs, Bon. This guy only played in 59 Bengal games. 59 Bengal games, almost 200 receptions, 24 touchdowns, Mon. He almost had a touchdown in every other Bengal game that he played in. And obviously in 2015, the big year, your favorite Bengal team of all time, he had 13 touchdowns. Obviously that injury was just so detrimental, that graphic, awful injury that happened in that Falcons game. Who knows what would happen, but Tyler Eifert really, again, he put a lot of life into that Bengals offense, and he was an incredible weapon. He was so much more. He's always been labeled as a tight end, but to me, he was never a tight end in this offense. He wasn't really a great blocker. He was a guy they flexed out wide, kind of like a Travis Kelce, that made those big plays. And he's really the only guy we've ever had like that. Hopefully Hayden Hurst is our next Tyler Eifert. So my three: AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and Tyler Eifert. So let's go.
Sneaky.
Let's go. Let's go to tight end. Who's your tight end?
Well, I wanted to put Tyler Eifert in there, but then I was looking at his stats. He was in the shop a lot. The poor guy had you mentioned the gruesome injury against the Falcons. Don't forget the game against the Ravens where his elbow popped out. Remember that? That was gruesome.
Oh, horrible.
Listen, when he was healthy, he could have been special. I mean, he was special. You mentioned the 13 TDs the 1 year. Great player. I was excited when they drafted him. But you know what? I picked another guy, and listen, I wasn't a giant fan of this guy. He drove me crazy with his penalties, but Jermaine Gresham. Yeah. Jermaine Gresham had 24 career TDs, solid stats, but he was always good for a false start or a holding call every game, and it just killed drives. I'll never forget the game Halloween night in Miami, 2013.
That's a safety game, right?
Yeah, that is a safety game. That
they lost
game,
on a safety.
I was mentally exhausted after that game. It was just unbelievable. I took my kids down there. Well, Marvin Jones scores on a 52-yard touchdown pass to Andy Dalton. Beautiful play. Called back because of a hold by Jermaine Gresham.
Yes.
I sat there. I remember there's another Bengal fan. I said, I told you, he's good for a penalty a game or two. Well, 3 plays later, Andy Dalton's driving the guys down the field. He throws a pick six, 90-yard return touchdown. And, I mean, it's a 14-point swing without the hold. And it wasn't like it was a ticky-tack call. But still, he was sloppy with his hands. It should have been 7. Bengals should have had 7 points. But no, instead, 3 plays later, he throws a pick six. Bengals come back. That was that great play by Gio Bernard where he ran.
Oh, that's one of the best runs. That's one of the best runs I've ever seen.
Yeah, and then of course, they lost the game in overtime, and I could ramble about that game.
Yeah. If
we had our kicker now, McPherson, playing in that game, we would have won that game because Marvin Lewis was afraid to kick a 50-yard field goal. Yeah. But enough of that. But Jermaine Gresham, solid player, 24 TDs, sneaky stats. I was expecting a little bit more out of him. Could have easily put Eifert in there, but Eifert, like I said, unfortunately, with his injuries, he just he missed a couple, almost 2 full years. And so I'm picking Jermaine Gresham.
Yeah, I went with Jermaine Gresham too. He was my guy. I mean, he played 5 years. He had almost 300 receptions from the tight end position. Something, I do think he was kind of a stretch, in the first round. I remember when they took him, I was like, what are we doing? Because I never saw that explosiveness. And but, he was solid. He was a solid guy. Like you said, his penalties were always just traumatic penalties. You know what I mean? They weren't like in a part of the game where you could recover. It was like you said, it was like a touchdown call back or a big play. But, again, that's a position the Bengals have always struggled at anyways. But I was going to make sure that I snuck Tyler Eifert in on mine somewhere. All right. Real quick, your flex. We talked about a flex. Who is your flex guy?
I'm going to go with Joe Mixon.
Okay,
Joe Mixon. Okay. I'm going to throw him in there, and he's hopefully he's on the he plays another few years, and I can get him on the team the next 10 years.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
Well, my guy's Giovanni Bernard. That's my flex guy. And again, Gio played 7 seasons with us, played 115 games. The guy was one of the most solid players. We talked about it on a previous pod. You and I are huge James Brooks fans, and he kind of filled that role. I thought he kind of reminded me a lot of James Brooks. But real quick, some numbers in career games. He finished with over 6,000 total yards and over 30 touchdowns. He was a guy we could always count on to make that big play on third down, or when the back got a little banged up, he was always that guy to go in and make some big plays for us. So my guy, Giovanni Bernard, that's my flex guy. All right, real quick, let's finish off with offense. Mon, let's do all 5 offensive linemen together. Go ahead and give me your 5, your O-line for 2010 to 2019.
Okay, Andrew Whitworth, left tackle. I got Andre Smith, right tackle. I got Kevin Zeitler, right guard. Clint Bowling, left guard. I picked Kyle Cook for center. There wasn't much to choose from, but Kyle Cook, to me, was the best in that decade.
Well, I have the exact same offensive line, except for I went with the other center of that decade. So I had Andrew Whitworth, Andre Smith, Zeitler, Bowling, and then I went with Russell Bodine. The one reason I did is because his durability was better than Kyle Cook's.
Gotcha.
And again, Russell Bodine, I don't remember, he was a part of some of those big offensive productive years, including your 2015 team, on the one you tell me about how great they are. Russell Bodine, the center on the 2015 team. But yes, and Whitworth, real quick, he's a Hall of Fame guy. Obviously, he's one of the best players that we have seen in the last couple decades for the Bengals. Another one of those special tackles. And I was sad to see him win the Super Bowl. But as far as a fan, I've always been a fan of Mr. Whitworth.
If he would have stayed with the Bengals wouldn't have Joe Burrow right now.
And that's true. That's probably true. He probably would have won more games, right?
Absolutely. We wouldn't have had the number 1 pick. But all right, let's do defense.
All right, here we go. Let's double up. Let's go to your 2 defensive ends. Who are your 2 defensive ends?
I got Michael Johnson and I got Carlos Dunlap. They were the most consistent. Dunlap was one of the elite ones for that whole decade. He had almost 100 sacks. Johnson, signed a giant contract. Remember, he left and went to the Buccaneers for one year.
For one year, right?
Yeah, and we ended up getting a compensatory pick for that, and then he comes back, and so we still got a comp pick for it. And he played about 2 or 3 more years with a solid player, good against the run, came up with some good key plays. But I think that was an easy one. Those 2. Robert Geathers played a lot. He was a solid player. He was honorable mention for me.
Okay. Mine's also Dunlap and Johnson. We laugh about Michael Johnson leaving. Remember, we beat them in 2014. Yeah. And I always said that's the reason why he came back home. But Michael Johnson, Carlos Dunlap, obviously, those are my 2 as well. Dunlap, second all-time in sacks for the Bengals. Michael Johnson, a really solid career for us. I mean, he was always a guy that I thought we could always count on. He always played well for us. Played in 125 games, had 350 tackles, 30-something sacks. He had a solid career for the Bengals. And obviously, like I said, Dunlap, like you said, for a couple years there, he was one of the elite pass rushers in the NFL. All right, who you got a defensive tackle? Who's your 2 tackles?
Easy. Pecco and Geno Atkins. Geno Atkins, listen, people may not agree with this, but at one time he was just as disruptive as Aaron Donald.
Oh, without a doubt.
Listen, he has a little bit of a donut in his career. That game I mentioned, the 2013 game against Miami, he tore his knee that year, ACL injury. He had 6 sacks. Yeah. And the next year he came back. He had a little, he was still recovering from that. I think he only had 4 sacks. He could have had, if he didn't injure his knee, he probably would have had another 10, 12 sacks in his career.
Yeah.
But Geno Atkins was very dominant. Unfortunately, had that shoulder injuries last year, wasn't very effective, but he's going to be one of my all-time favorite Bengal players. But Geno Atkins and Dometa Peko.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Peko for me, Geno Atkins for me. Those are easy. I think that whole defensive line. I think that's easy. 4 easy choices.
Absolutely.
Geno Atkins. I agree. He was one of the best, maybe the best at that position in that decade.
Yeah.
In the entire NFL, not just in the AFC or for the Bengals, but he was so dominant, and people I don't think realize how good Geno Atkins was. He obviously finished 3rd all time in sacks, and he played his whole career with the Bengals. And I love those kind of things where you have, Bengals that are lifelong Bengals. And I just can't imagine Geno in another uniform. I'm glad he went out that way. And hopefully one day we see him in the Ring of Honor, because he definitely deserves it. And I'll tell you what, Peko was a guy you could always count on. He was always there. I don't ever remember him missing a game.
Yeah.
I don't remember him ever missing a game. I mean, he was just as solid as they are. He was a team guy, right? I mean, it was never about him. It was always about the team and what he could do. I loved him. I love when he folded Troy Polamalu. That's one of my favorite plays, when they put Peko at running back and he just folded him at the goal line. So
that was a great shot.
I'm the same way. So for me, Peko and Atkins. All right, 3 linebackers. Who you got?
Ray Maluga, Vontaze Burfict. This other one was a little tough. I mean, we had Manny Lawson, Nick Vigil, Harrison, A.J. Hawk. We had a lot of stopgap guys. Preston Brown. I picked Vinny Ray.
So did I.
I did Vinny Ray. Listen, Ray Maluga was, I expected a little bit more out of him when he was drafted from USC. He was like, I remember the write-up in college about him. He was just phenomenal. All those linebackers at USC were just
those 3 were incredible.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be the best. Listen, he had a solid NFL career. He had 7 career interceptions, I think, with the Bengals. He was a thumper. He was a true linebacker. Yeah, he was a solid guy. Vontaze, listen, tone setter, intimidator. When he was on, he changed the game. Again, we mentioned Jermaine Gresham and penalties. Well, Vontaze was that way on the defense. He was good for a 15-yarder a game, it seemed like. But he was just, he always, he played hard. And guys were afraid to come over the middle. That guy would just kill you. If he played for the Steelers, I mean, Steeler linebackers played that way their whole career, and everybody.
He'd be worshipped.
Vontaze Burfict became public enemy number 1. All these national media guys are going after him. I can name 10 Steeler linebackers that played that way, and they're in the Hall of Fame. Some of them are.
Yeah.
But Vontaze definitely made that list. Vinny Ray and Ray Maluga.
Yeah, those are my 3. I cannot believe that we agreed on those. For me too, Ray Maluga, Vinny Ray, and Vontaze Burfict. Listen, I'll say it again. Vontaze Burfict is the reason that we were winning with 1.5 minutes left.
He was the best player on the field. He was the best player on the field that game.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. Remember we were being shut out at halftime, Mon. He literally took the football team on his back and carried the Bengals the entire second half of that football game. And if, again, I'm going back to the Jeremy Hill fumble. If Jeremy Hill does not fumble that ball, I really find it interesting to see where Vontaze Burfict's career goes, because I'm going to tell you right now, he would have been the MVP of that game without a doubt. He was the best player on the field, like you said.
Yeah,
I need
more blood pressure medication right now.
I know, me too. he became public enemy number 1, and if he was on, I always felt like if he played for the Raiders or the Steelers or the Ravens, he would be worshipped in the NFL world. But because he was on the Bengals, and the Bengals had a couple rough patches there with some players, he was all of a sudden the worst player in the NFL. And when he was on, he was one of the best linebackers in the NFL.
He did. Listen, he did push the envelope. He did at times.
He did.
He pushed the envelope, and let's go to Vinny Ray real quick. Let's go to Vinny Ray before we move on, because again, Ray Maluga, he's a typical, prototypical Mike linebacker.
in between tackles. He wasn't a flashy guy. He was a thumper. Vinny Ray, to me, was one of my favorite players in that entire decade. The guy played special team. He was a true captain of that team. He was a leader on those Bengal teams. The guy did whatever they asked him to do. When he came in on defense, he played really well. I mean, he wasn't just like a stopgap linebacker. He was a really good linebacker, and I absolutely love the guy. He had just as many interceptions at linebacker as Vontaze Burfict. He had almost 500 tackles. Vinny Ray did. All right, here we go. Our 4 defensive backs, Mon. Who you got?
I got Leon Hall, Adam Jones, Reggie Nelson, and Sean Williams.
I have the exact same 4.
Oh, do you? Wow.
This is crazy. Yeah. Let's talk about it real quick.
I was waiting for you to say something. Well, you got quiet. Well, I thought you were gonna. Okay, no, that's my 4.
Okay, well, I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. Leon Hall. Obviously, that was the tail end of his career. Those first 3 years, we'll talk about that decade next week. But his first 3 years, Mon, were so impressive. They were so impressive, and we'll talk about that decade next week. But I'm with you. Leon Hall, Adam Jones, and then obviously Reggie Nelson. I absolutely love.
He's one of
Reggie.
my all-time favorite Bengals. I love him.
Well, he was Mr. Roethlisberger killer, right? I mean, he was a Steeler killer. He finished so many Steeler games for the Bengals. You know, the biggest one I remember was in what year was that? 2012 or 2013? I think it was 2012. He had that big interception. In Pittsburgh that set up the winning field goal at the end of the game.
Brown field goal,
Josh Brown field goal. I think it was 2012.
Yeah.
Reggie Nelson, and I'm not just saying this because he played football at the high school that I'm the head coach at. Reggie Nelson, to me, again, one of my favorite players in that entire decade. One of the best Bengal trades of all time. What a steal they got from the Jacksonville Jaguars when they got Reggie Nelson. And Sean Williams, he was a solid player. He really was. And his numbers were solid too.
Yes.
But those are my 4. My flex guy on defense is Jesse Bates.
Oh, wow.
Jesse Bates' first 2 years in the league. He had over 200 tackles. The guy was a monster those first 2 years. And now, obviously, he's become one of the best in the league. But Jesse Bates is my flex player. Who's your flex guy?
You know what? I mentioned Robert Geathers earlier. I'm going to have him because, they had him play linebacker at times. He sort of Sam Hubbard sort of plays that role right now because they had Geathers playing all over the place. I loved him. He was a really solid Bengal. But you know what? That was a good decade. There's a lot of really solid players that Duke Tobin, Mike Brown, they did a great job drafting and building quality teams.
So let's finish real quick with special teams. Obviously, I don't have to ask you. Kevin Huber's your punter, I'm sure, and Mr. Mike Nugent is your kicker. I mean, let's go real quick. Mike Nugent. I mean, again, everything now falls in comparison with Money Mac, but with Nugent, he made some big kicks. I remember that Seattle game. That was a huge win for the Bengals. That was a huge game winner. Mike Nugent had some big kicks for the Bengals, and one of those playoff games, I'm thinking it was either 2013 or 2014. He had made like 5 field goals or something in that game. I can't remember what year it was, but he played well for the Bengals. He really did, and he finished with an 81%, 82%, something like that field goal percentage. But he did in 2011. He did set 2 franchise records with 33 field goals made and 132 points. And I'm guessing Kevin Huber, obviously he's Mr. Bengal for both of us.
Those are my two.
And my returner is also Adam Jones. Adam Pac-Man Jones, a guy who I remember you and I watching the games and we're screaming at the TV, just put Pac-Man in.
Yes.
We need some yards here. We need a big play on special teams. he always seemed to do that. And your son Jake was reminding us before we went on air that he actually led the NFL in 2014 with 31 yards.
Yeah, 31 yards per kick return.
Per kick return. So again, we haven't had an explosive guy in a very long time. He was the closest thing that we had to that explosive type of returner. But
yes,
if I look correctly, we pretty much have the exact same defense except for our flex guy. You have Robert Gathers. I have Jesse Bates.
Yeah.
I feel very weird that we agree. It's much more strange when we agree than when we actually disagree with each other. So, but Maan, what a great decade. I mean, it truly was. We had so many fun years, and really, again, that decade made the Bengals relevant again. And whatever happened at the end of that decade, all the heartbreak of the 2015 game and losing Witt, and we are where we are now because of what happened at the tail end of that decade.
Yeah, it was a solid decade. They did such a great job of building that roster. I remember Jim Harbaugh mentioning how the Bengals had John Harbaugh, the coach of the Ravens. Did I get his?
Yes.
It's John. I'm sorry, John Harbaugh.
Yeah.
He was mentioning how the Bengals had a top 5 roster in the NFL. I mean, they were really elite. 3 potential Hall of Famers on those playoff teams: Whitworth, Green, and Geno Atkins.
Yep.
Just phenomenal. 5 consecutive playoff appearances. Sort of upsets me a little bit. We talked about Rich Eisen earlier. I want to talk about Carson Palmer, for example. Carson, he loves to take pot shots at the Bengals. But, Mike Brown traded him. All right. And guess what happened? The Bengals go to 5 consecutive playoff appearances without him. It's safe to say, listen, Andy Dalton didn't have the skill set of a Carson Palmer.
No.
All right. But still, he found a way to lead that team to 5 consecutive playoff appearances. Carson complained the Bengals can't build a winner. They don't draft well. They don't get players. If he would have just taken a deep breath and looked at that roster and look at the talent they were accumulating, listen to John Harbaugh. I mean, they had a special roster. And I'll tell you what, researching this, we were talking about this off air, but, they obviously had to win a lot of big games in this decade. They did, all right? But Marvin Lewis, the primetime record speaks for itself. Obviously they didn't win any playoff games. They just didn't have that mental toughness. Some of these big games, they just didn't show up. They weren't prepared. And I want to compare that to the team that just went to the Super Bowl. I mean, they had so many must-win games last year. Yeah. Remember, they lost 2 in a row to the Jets and the Browns. They had the week off, bye week. Then they had to go on the road and play the Raiders. That's never easy. Guess what? No. They played one of their best games of the year and beat the Raiders. Okay, they had to beat the Chiefs to win the division in the regular season. Chiefs had won 10 in a row. The Bengals beat them. All right. The Bengals have to go play the Raiders in the playoffs. It's hard to beat a team twice in one season. They beat the Raiders. Okay. Then they go on the road. You mentioned this earlier. They beat the Titans. They number 1 seed in Tennessee. Then they have to go to Kansas City and they beat the Chiefs for the second time. That's mental toughness. And I'm telling you, I think this team, Zach Taylor and his staff, this is what's going to make this current Bengal decade better than the previous one. I'm excited about it.
I agree. Those are great points too that you made. And again, real quick to the Andy Dalton, Carson Palmer thing. You're right. Andy didn't have all those qualities, but he did have one that Carson didn't, and that was guys playing for him. And that is a big, very important quality at that position. Playing the quarterback position, you can come out with the best arm in the world and be 6'5" and be able to run and do all these other things. But if you cannot lead a football team, if those guys in the huddle, those other 10 guys in the huddle, if they don't believe what's coming out of your mouth, it doesn't matter what you can do physically. And I think you saw that with Andy Dalton. Those guys believed in Andy Dalton. They always defended him when the media was against him, when everybody was against him. His teammates always defended him. And I think that says a lot about Andy Dalton, not just as a player, but as a man and as again, the Bengals quarterback of that decade. And I think you see that Now we have a quarterback in Joe Burrow that has all those physical attributes. And guess what? He has the other ones too.
Yeah.
He is that special where he can do it on the field and those guys believe in him. And like you said, man, this is a great time to be a Bengal fan. Okay. All right, guys. Well, that is another edition of the Bengals Pulse. Again, if you like this podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Make sure you check us out on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify, all of those podcast platforms. Again, guys, if you enjoyed listening, please go on there and give us a 5-star review. We would much appreciate it. Please follow us on Twitter at Bengals_Pulse9, or on Instagram, the exact same without the at, Bengals_Pulse9. Maan, great show. I can't believe how much we agreed. I feel very strange right now. I cannot wait till next week. Next week, we have another big show planned for you guys. He is Maan. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse, the heartbeat of our Cincinnati Bengals. Guys, hoo-day. We will see you next week.
See ya.